It is said of the Rockefellers that John D. Sr. made the money and John D. Jr. gave it away. As with most oversimplifications, there's some truth in this, but only some. John D. Rockefeller Sr. did, of course, become America's first billionaire, but it was he who set up what is now the second largest philanthropic foundation in America. His philanthropic work was carried on and broadened by his son and is now carried on by his 5 grandsons. The eldest of the grandsons is John Davison Rockefeller III, born and reared in New York City, educated at Browning School in Manhattan and the Loomis School in Connecticut, and graduated from Princeton University in 1929, where, incidentally, his class elected him the man most likely to succeed. In that same year, he was one of 4 young men selected to be a junior secretary at a conference of the Institute of Pacific Relations in Japan. That visit and a trip around the world stimulated an interest in international affairs and particularly an interest in the Orient, which has deepened through the years. As with each of his brothers, Nelson, Lawrence, Winthrop, and David, John D. III has found his own special areas of interest and has served in a leadership capacity on a variety of boards, too long to catalog here. He is chairman of the board of the Rockefeller Foundation and was appointed by the president to the board of directors of the Corporation for Public Broadcasting. When not engaged in one of his many philanthropic enterprises, Mr. Rockefeller lives, modestly we are told, on his cattle breeding farm near Tarrytown, New York. Mr. Rockefeller, your brother Nelson was quoted as having said in an article, "I've never found it a problem to be a Rockefeller." Would you agree with your brother in this respect?
Well, I would feel there were strong advantages and some situations where one was a little less comfortable and if one was just an ordinary citizen. But generally, I would agree.
I would suspect that the advantages may be rather obvious. Where does it work to your disadvantage, where being an ordinary citizen might be a bit easier?
Well, like in travel, sometime one wants to just be a tourist in an area, and one finds one is somewhat singled out for special attention. Advantages there, too, of course.
Yes. Is it any disadvantage in the kind of work you do for the most part? You travel a good deal, of course. You're here in San Francisco, meeting with a wide variety of people, incidentally, going to Hunter's Point and Chinatown and places of this sort. Is it a disadvantage or an advantage in this respect?
No. When you say in the public realm, related to organizations, sometimes in the fundraising side, I'm told that if some member of my family is involved with the activity, there's a feeling that maybe the finances aren't as pressing as they would be otherwise.
I see.
And that has sometimes disadvantageous elements to it.
And the likelihood of one member of your family being involved, I suspect, is rather high in many cases, too, is it not? Is there a special obligation to being a Rockefeller in carrying the name, the history? It must impose certain obligations upon you.
Somehow, coming down from my grandfather, there was the atmosphere of stewardship for the family means, that as it's passed from generation to generation, it's not just for us and our pleasure. There's a sense of public responsibility in the use of it. And that element is carried through from generation to generation, I think, in a very meaningful, constructive way. But that is a special element in the picture that your question brings out.
You, of course, knew your grandfather, did you?
Oh, yes, very well. Oh, yes.
I suppose he was in his later years when you were most conscious of his influence and presence.
I was born in 1906. He died in 1937.
I see.
So we had years
What kind of man do you remember him to be? I'm thinking particularly of your childhood years.
A very wonderful person, kindly, gentle, a sense of humor. He loved to tell stories. He loved to tell jokes, starting out in an atmosphere of seriousness and then coming to his climax.
What kind of relationship did he have with his grandsons? One always thinks of the grandfather doting upon the grandsons, he not having the responsibility the father has sometimes. Was he this kind of grandfather? Was he one who counseled you, for example, as young men?
Not particularly. He was always warm and friendly and informal with us. We used to often go to meals with him or go to stay with him when he was in Florida. Never a sense of making us feel that he was telling us what to do or preaching to us, but warm and responsive and accessible. Now, we had, all of us, the highest feeling of esteem for him.
In an article which you have written in Saturday Review recently, last year as a matter of fact, this was about young people. I'm going to ask you more about the article later, but I did pick out this one quotation. I cannot stress too strongly my belief that children learn much more from what their parents do than from what they say. Was this the case in your own childhood? Your father, your grandfather as well?
I believe so.
Were a model of in what
well,
they
I wouldn't
did?
want to say a model, but I feel we learned more through that side than we did through what we were told verbally to do or not to do. To me, it's the most compelling approach as far as the parent-child relationship is concerned.
You've mentioned that this responsibility that is the Rockefellers, the responsibility to the public that you feel is passed down from generation to generation. Where the six of you, no mention's been made so far of the fact that you have a sister as well as four brothers. Were the six of you, in any sense, groomed for the responsibility which you were to take on as you grew older from your father?
Well, I'm sure that was in our parents' minds,
but you weren't
we
conscious
never were
of it.
conscious of it as such. I mean, there was this atmosphere of the stewardship, which is part of what you're saying. But one thinks of royal families and the responsibility that so obviously is coming there. Well, we had no atmosphere or training of that character. So it wasn't a burden, but we were aware of the special opportunities and the special responsibilities that
To what extent, if this question is answerable at all, to what extent did each of you pursue your own predilections, your own interests? You, when you went to Princeton, I noticed majored in economics and history. Was this a matter of a sense of the responsibility you might have, or simply your own personal interest?
No, that was my own interest. But to answer your question, generally speaking, we all, without question, did pursue our own inclinations, our own lines of interest. It was a little different situation in my own starting off. I was
you're the eldest.
That's right, exactly. My father had been an only son, so he had automatically gone in with his father to do whatever he could to help his father. I happened to be the first of my brothers, and my father assumed that I would do that, which I did up until the Second World War, just joining in with him on any of his activities where he felt I could be helpful. But after that, I branched out on my own.
Why? Why was the Second World War the point at which you branched out on your own?
Well, the war made a major interlude, of course. I mean, all of us went away from our normal pursuits.
You were in the Navy during the war, as a matter of fact.
And when I came back, it gave a chance to take a fresh look at what I was doing. Actually, so many of the family interests, like the Rockefeller Foundation, the Rockefeller Institute, Rockefeller Center, Williamsburg, all came in my direction. And after the war, my brothers and I felt that we should divide up the family interests, each one taking leadership in the one that seemed the most appropriate.
So in a sense, you each had your own choice, although I suspect there was still a certain aura of responsibility that each of you had to take on certain things that you might not.
That's right, but that was within the family interest, which is only a small segment of our own personal activities.
There seems, on the surface at least, no spirit of competition among the five brothers. If there is, it doesn't appear to me in the research which we have done. Has it always been that way, and even in your younger years?
Well, the way it's worked out, we've all been in such different fields, like politics or banking or population.
And there's been enough for all, too.
That's right. So it hasn't seemed like sort of a parallel effort. So generally speaking, I agree with you, but I imagine it's not human not to feel a little incentive from the fact that there are other members of the family of one's own generation, each working in their own field. But basically, your statement is correct.
As I was saying at the outset of the program in your introduction, you first gained your interest, apparently, in international affairs with your visit to Japan, and I saw you shaking your head as though that were, in fact, a rather important event in your life.
Well, between my junior and senior year at college, I spent the summer in Geneva as a staff worker in the Secretariat of the League of Nations. And that was my first exposure on the international front. And that was a tremendously meaningful one. And that was followed up by the trip which you mentioned the next year after I graduated. I took this trip around the world lasting 4 months, including this conference in Kyoto of the Institute of Pacific Relations, at which I was a sub-assistant secretary.
A sub-assistant secretary, I see. And yet that apparently had a profound influence upon your life and the direction which it took subsequently. Why?
Well, I went with this older man who was then head of the Foreign Policy Association in New York, and he was taking the trip as part of his job to interview leaders in the various countries we went to. And of course, that was a kind of exposure I'd never had before. And I went with him on all the meetings. And it opened my eyes in a way that was, at that age, very meaningful, and also made me aware of the problems of the world. And I imagine that's one of the elements that started me on my population line of interest.
One can certainly appreciate that this would be an unusual opportunity to meet these leaders.
Sure.
And yet, I suppose the assumption is also easily made that growing up as you have in a famous family, that other famous people would be around you all the time. Was this not the case?
Well, I would object to the all the time.
Well, I see. That
from
was
time,
it. Yeah.
From time to time.
All right.
That's right.
Yes.
I mean, people would come, and my family would invite the children in. And
did any of these have any particular influence upon you?
None would
I should think with
stand
a
out
father
to
as
me
strong
that
as yours was, that this would be the major influence rather than the casual acquaintances.
I mean, most of these were casual, as you say, people for coming for dinner or some function. But it was a good exposure.
Now, you've just mentioned that it was this trip around the world which first gave you your interest in population control. I don't want to let this slip by. This is, today, one of your consuming interests, is it not?
Right. I prefer to use the word population stabilization.
Why?
I feel the word control, we talk about birth control, population control, has sort of a negative ring to it, maybe implying government's going to step in and then control. To me, family planning and the whole population question should be thought of positively as the basis for the enrichment of life, not the restriction of life. There's a phrase that's being used more these days, that the quality of life. And to me, unless we have stabilized population, we will not attain the levels that we could or should in terms of quality of life.
What or who is the enemy you fight?
Well, I've never thought of it quite in those terms, the enemy. But to me today...
The adversary, I suppose.
To me today, the two key problems towards the forward motion of family planning are, one, a better, more effective contraceptive, simpler. The other is the recognition by the world leaders, the heads of governments, that they must take the leadership within their countries to the development of programs that are of a magnitude to do the kind of job that must be done.
In another article, I guess in this, yes, an article, it was a speech, not an article, and it goes back to 1953. You outlined a 4-point code of conduct for the United States, and included in that was, first, to refrain from a tendency to impose our ideas or a way of life on other people's. Not quite obviously, you don't feel that population stabilization is in any sense the imposition of our ideas upon other people.
No, but but the point you make is a real one. Because our nation is so big and so powerful, anything we do or say with other countries...
Would appear to be that.
Yeah, I mean, there's a danger of that. And that makes me all the more concerned that we only respond to other countries in terms to their requests, their approach to us for assistance. And also, it makes me realize the importance that we act at home in regard to the population problem. I believe we should, but I think it also has the psychological value abroad, that if they know we're concerned and moving forward here, they realize it isn't something that we're dreaming up, especially for them.
And tied with this, in addition to the quality of life, and as a part of the quality of life, is, I suppose, the enormous economic problem that's being posed by unstabilized populations.
Right. The forward motion of so many countries depends to a large extent on their somehow stabilizing their populations.
Because the fourth of these points that I mentioned a moment ago is recognize that the success or failure of one people increasingly affects all and is a responsibility of all, which is to say that the problem posed in the underdeveloped areas of the world and the widening gap between the developed and underdeveloped areas poses one of the greatest threats in the world today.
And must be considered by all of us as common concern and common problem.
Mr. Rockefeller, is it difficult to give away money effectively?
Well, most people believe that what's really tough in life is the earning of money, that the giving away, you just kind of hand out a little here and a little there. My own belief is that one can do as much harm in giving money wrongly as you can do good in giving it rightly. So I believe that the same careful thinking and planning and research should go into the giving of money as is in the making of money.
Is there an element of creativity and grantsmanship?
Well, there's a terrific opportunity for creativity. I mean, it doesn't automatically come. To me, there are two kinds of giving. There's sort of what I call citizenship giving, which is giving to community organizations like your hospital, the Boy Scouts, where they're big established operations, and you do your share in relation to them. There's the other, which I've tended to call special interest giving, where you're pursuing areas that have special concern to you, special meaning to you. And those are the areas, I believe, where your point about creativity has the greatest opportunity.
What about the concern which has been voiced most recently in Congress about the social engineering, so to speak, the term I suspect is theirs, social foundations carry on, the kinds of changes that they can affect with their grants?
Well, I'm not sure if you're referring to recent publicity in relation to the Ways and Means Committee hearings.
Yes, I had that in mind, but I suspect it's a question that's been raised recently, but I suspect it'll be raised again and again.
That's right. I testified before the committee, and I made the point, which I think is responsive to your question, that because our problems today are so big and so complex that every element of our society is needed to resolve them. And obviously government has to carry the biggest load, I think, of urban problems. But my own belief is that private initiative, and to me private initiative is philanthropy, can play a tremendously important part, that they bring a special approach that can be very useful. Now, when you have government working on a problem and private initiative working on them, you do have potentially an interrelationship there. Not potentially, but actually, that's a new element. And what I've called, you get into the realm of political overtones. And I think those are a matter of concern to those of us on the philanthropy side and to government as well. And I think that's what the Ways and Means Committee, the Congress, is worrying about now, and we are too. And I'm most sympathetic with their concerns. On the other hand, also I'm concerned to do anything that would inhibit the freedom of private initiative in the coping with problems, because to me it's one of the great strengths of our society.
Now, in the organization Rockefeller Brothers Incorporated, you and your brothers have used money to help high-risk industries get going. In your philanthropic work, do you regard high risk as important to you?
I do. The word venture capital is
yes.
a very common term. I like to think of venture philanthropy in the same way. And to me, it's this willingness to risk, this ability to risk, that makes the private initiative factor so important in the resolution of some of these problems. Now, we strongly believe in that kind of approach.
I should think with the kind of power, in a sense, that philanthropy at a scale of the Rockefeller fortunes represent, that one would sometimes feel that he didn't know all he ought to know. There's so much more to know because of the applications that are possible with
problems. No, we strongly believe in that kind of approach.
I should think with the kind of power, in a sense, that philanthropy at a scale of the Rockefeller fortunes represent, that one would sometimes feel that he didn't know all he ought to know. There's so much more to know because of the applications that are possible with this. Do you feel this at all?
Of course, I think that's true in life generally, with most of the questions we're asked to resolve.
Every citizen, I guess, is faced with this, isn't he?
That's right, but I do think, though, it's a tougher one in the philanthropic field. If you're in business, you have your balance sheet, and you can always check how you're doing by the balance sheet. On the philanthropic front, there's nothing comparable to check how you're doing. Often only time will really give you the answer. And my feeling is this is a complicating factor, and that this new approach of evaluation, built-in evaluation of projects is an important step forward.
To most Americans, I suspect that our highest motivation is security, and that implies money. When you're born with that security and that money, what is the motivation that gives life meaning and excitement?
No, but to me, I mean, I don't disagree with your point. I think it's true, but I do think the average American, anyway, has an urge to accomplish something, to attain a position of respect in the community, to be recognized as somebody a little above the other fella. And I think this urge, which is a positive urge, or should be positive, can be negative, is a motivating factor that stirs most Americans. there's, at the hearings in Washington, somebody made a study of the basis of philanthropic giving, and he pointed out the matter of the tax advantage was something like 6 on the list, that other factors were the primary ones in people's decision to give or to, in other ways, help their fellow citizens.
We all have to have a feeling of usefulness to others, I suspect.
That's right, but there's a self-interest factor in it. I think it lifts us to feel we're constructive and helpful and moving forward the efforts of society.
You've been involved in so many different kinds of enterprises, not all philanthropic, of course. And maybe this is an unfair question, but at this point in your life, is there one act, one activity, one involvement that has given you the kind of satisfaction you spoke of a moment ago, more than the others?
Well, I hate to have to choose, because I have been fortunate in being exposed on several fronts that I felt were exciting and important and meaningful to me. But I think if I had to pick one at the moment, it would be the population question, because to me it's so key, so underlying to the future of all of us in terms of the quality of life, and that there's so relatively little being done about it anywhere in the world. Only 5 countries that have programs that are really national in scope and promising of results of a really significant character.
So the challenge alone in this question is enormous, is it not?
No, it's intriguing to be involved in a problem like this and try to find ways to be helpful. I mean, your word challenge is good. I hadn't thought of it quite in that term.
Mr. Rockefeller, the Rockefeller family has been challenged, and in my research, I'm quite amazed to discover the various ways in which it's met these challenges. And I suspect that your own family, you have children of your own.
4.
Are likewise groomed, perhaps unconsciously, by their father's example to assume the responsibility that will one day be theirs.
Or put it a little differently, to have a sense of responsibility, which comes out about the same.
Thank you very much.
This program was recorded April 1969.
This is NET, the Public Television Network.